In the quiet town of Eboob, where red dust curled in the wind like old spirits and the scent of grilled maize filled the afternoon air, lived a young woman named Ndali. She was 23, with deep brown eyes that carried more wisdom than her years, and calloused hands from grinding yam, fetching water, and selling akara by the roadside. Ndali lived in a cramped compound with her younger brothers, her ailing mother, and a future as uncertain as the clouds before a rainstorm. Her father had died when she was 16, and since then the weight of the household had fallen on her small shoulders. Every morning, before the rooster's second crow, Ndali tied her wrapper tight and stepped out barefoot onto the cold soil, humming an old song her grandmother once sang, a song about survival, about dignity in the face of hardship. Across town, in a modest mechanic workshop hidden between iron shops and timber yards, worked Chisholm, a tall, soft-spoken man in his 30s with oil on his fingers and secrets in his eyes. He wore tattered overalls and worked on cars like his life depended on it. Most people in Eboobe saw him as just a mechanic. What they didn't know was that he owned the very company whose sign hung above the auto parts store on the highway, Zubatech Motors. Chisholm had built the empire in silence, under another name, letting others wear the title while he studied his own people. Tired of betrayal and fake friends, he had chosen to live simply, dressing like a common man to see who would love him for who he truly was. That's when he noticed her. Ndali. He first saw her selling akara under the mango tree across from his shop. Her laughter was real. Her hands worked fast, and unlike others, she greeted him without looking down on his grease-stained clothes. "Good afternoon, Brother Chisholm," she'd say with a kind smile, as she wrapped akara in brown paper and handed it to him with the same respect she'd give a king. That one sentence made him feel seen. He didn't speak much at first, but he came every morning, bought her akara, asked for extra pepper even though he hated it, just to keep the moment going. Over time they talked more, about her mother's medicine, her dreams of being a seamstress, his dreams, though he kept most of them buried, and then... One morning, the akara stand was empty. Chisholm waited. He waited long enough that the sun began to bite. Then he saw her running toward him barefoot, breathless, cheeks wet. "My mama fainted. Please, please help me," she begged. Without a word, Chisholm dropped everything, locked up his workshop and carried her mother on his back to the small local clinic. He paid the bills, sat outside all night, told no one. Ndali never forgot it. Neither did her mother. The town whispered about them after that. But they didn't care. They grew close like roots under the ground, quiet, strong, and tangled, until... One hot Sunday afternoon, Chisholm asked her to marry him. He had no ring. Just a quiet voice, a hand on her cheek, and a promise. "I may not have much, Ndali, but I will never leave you hungry or unloved." Ndali said yes. Little did she know, the man she had chosen to marry was hiding a truth big enough to change their entire lives. The day Ndali married Chisholm, the sky was overcast, as if even the heavens weren't sure whether to cry or smile. Their wedding was held under the big Iroko tree outside the community hall. There was no fancy cake, no big canopy, no band from the city, just red dust, wooden benches, and the soft sound of a borrowed drum. Her wedding gown was second-hand, adjusted by her own hands with bits of leftover lace. Chisholm wore a plain white shirt, the collar ironed too sharp, the sleeves a little too short. But when they looked into each other's eyes, it was as if they stood in a palace. Still, not everyone saw it that way. "I can't believe she married that grease boy," someone muttered. "Is this love or punishment?" Another scoffed, folding her arms. Ndali heard the whispers, but she held Chisholm's hand tighter. After all, love was not in the food or the fashion. It was in the sacrifices people were willing to make for each other. Their first home was a one-room apartment behind the workshop. It had no ceiling, a leaky zinc roof, and rats that made noise like uninvited guests. But Chisholm swept the floor every morning before she woke. He cooked yam porridge when she was tired. He washed her wrappers when she had her period and made her laugh until she forgot the pain. He gave her peace. And yet, the world didn't stop judging. Ndali's childhood friend, Miran, came to visit weeks after the wedding. She had just come From the city with a new phone and fake lashes. You're better than this, Myron said, wrinkling her nose at the cracked walls. He's just a mechanic. You had dreams, Indali. Indali smiled faintly, brushing her hand over the sewing machine Chisholm had saved up to buy her as a surprise. I still do, but now I have someone who believes in them with me. But Mirren only laughed, tapping on her phone. Back at the workshop, Chisholm kept to himself. Customers came and went, unaware that the man adjusting their engines was the silent founder of Zubatech Motors. Some days, he stared at the empty plot beside his shop, the one that used to be a small tech hub he opened under a fake name. But he wasn't ready to reveal the truth yet, not until he was sure, not until he was ready to see who truly stood by him. Then, one day, opportunity knocked. A sleek black Jeep rolled into the village. A man stepped out, shoes shining like mirrors, suit smooth as silk. It was Mr. O'Gene, the public face of Zubatech Motors. He was loud, charismatic, but cruel in quiet ways. He had come to scout land for expansion. Chisholm watched from a distance. Mr. O'Gene didn't recognize him. He never did. To him, Chisholm had always been just the silent investor, the one who sent the money, built the foundation, and stepped back. But now O'Gene wanted to take full control, and Chisholm knew. The time to stay hidden was running out, because when O'Gene met Ndali by chance at the market, he smiled too wide. And the moment he saw her beauty, he made a decision that would shake everything. He would take what wasn't his. Mr. O'Gene didn't just smile when he saw Ndali. He studied her. It was market day in Iboob. The air buzzed with haggling voices, the clatter of basins, and the smell of ripe pawpaw and fresh fish. Ndali stood behind her small fabric stall, sorting through Ankara prints she'd stitched into headscarves the night before. "Excuse me?" O'Gene said, stepping closer, his shoes barely touching the dusty ground. Ndali looked up. The man's clothes screamed money. His scent was foreign, his tone smooth like polished stone. "Yes, sir?" she asked politely. "You made these?" he asked, picking up a deep blue scarf with gold trim. "Yes, I sew in the evenings. Something small to support my home." O'Gene smiled again, too wide. "You're very talented. What's your name, beautiful?" "Ndali." He paused. "Ndali. That name should be known beyond this dusty town." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Thank you, sir, but this dusty town is my home." He didn't buy anything that day, but the next day he returned, and the next he brought food, compliments, even an offer. "I can take you to the city, open a shop for you. Your talent shouldn't be wasted here." But Ndali always shook her head. "I'm married, sir." His smile didn't fade. "Married to whom? That mechanic boy?" She froze. "How do you—" "Small town. People talk," O'Gene said with a shrug. "A woman like you deserves more." That evening, when Ndali told Chisholm about the encounter, he went quiet. Too quiet. She looked at him. "Do you know this man?" Chisholm's lips twitched. "He used to work with someone I knew very well." She didn't press further. She trusted her husband. But what she didn't know was that O'Gene had started asking questions. Who really was Chisholm? Why did his name sound familiar? Why did this poor mechanic walk with such quiet confidence? And one night O'Gene followed Chisholm after work. He watched as Chisholm walked through a back door into an abandoned office behind the timber yard. He watched him pull out a folder, dust off an old computer, and type in a code that opened company records. Zubatech company records. O'Gene's eyes widened. Rage boiled under his skin. "This fool," he whispered. "This fool never left." The next morning, O'Gene called a secret board meeting in the city. "We have a situation," he said. "The ghost has come back. We either bury him again, or he'll bury us." Chisholm knew something had changed. For days, customers at the workshop thinned out. Tools went missing. His landlord came with warnings about unpaid rent, though Chisholm had paid it in full months ago. Whispers followed him. And when he entered the market with Ndali, some women stopped talking altogether. It was like the village had turned its back. Quietly. Suddenly. One night, as he washed grease from his hands in a rusty basin outside their room, Ndali brought him A bowl of okra soup and pounded yam. You haven't been eating, she said softly. Chisholm looked at her, weary. Do you believe in me, Indali? She frowned, setting the tray down. What kind of question is that? Even if the world turns against me, he added, voice low. I didn't marry the world, she replied, eyes shining. I married you. That night, Chisholm didn't sleep. He sat on a wooden stool outside their home, listening to crickets and the far-off sound of drums. The next morning, the village square was buzzing. A notice had been posted on the town board. Zubatec Motors disassociates from one Chisholm's. Nwoke mechanic and fraudster. Chisholm stood in front of the board, reading the words with tight lips. Eugene stood nearby, flanked by two men in fine suits. You should have stayed in hiding, Eugene said with a smirk. Now the village knows who you really are. A liar. A thief? Chisholm turned to him calmly. No lies, I built Zubatec, I have the papers. You ran it into the ground while I stayed back to fix the foundation. Eugene laughed. You have no witnesses, no title, no voice, and now no wife. Chisholm froze. What did you say? Eugene stepped closer. She deserves better. And when she finds out what you've been hiding, do you really think she'll stay with a man who never trusted her with the truth? That night, Chisholm returned home with dirt on his hands. Not from fixing a car, but from digging through his old records hidden beneath the floorboards of the workshop. He pulled out the original founding documents, receipts, transfer logs, confidential, memos signed with his name, CN. The next morning he gave them to Indali, all of it. She sat on the floor, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. I wanted to know who would love me for me, not the name, not the money, just me. She stared at him, long and hard, and then her voice broke. But I am your wife, Chisholm, not a stranger. You should have trusted me. No, he said quietly, but now they're coming for everything, even you. Indali stood, wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders, then let them come. The village square was more crowded than usual that morning. News spread like wildfire. Indali, the mechanic's wife, had gone to Chief Easy, the most respected elder in Ebuba, asking for a public hearing. Nobody could remember the last time a woman requested such a thing, especially not a poor girl, especially not the wife of a man now labelled a fraud. But there she stood, barefaced, braided hair, wrapped in a simple red scarf, dressed in the same Ankara gown she had sewn herself. No jewellery, no pretense, just a heart full of fire. I have something to say, she began, her voice steady. People leaned forward. Even the market women stopped fanning their wares. Behind her, Chisholm stood silently, hands clenched. Mr. Eugene, in his pressed caftan and gold wristwatch, wore a mocking smile, sure the crowd would crush her spirit. I am Indali, she said, eyes sweeping the crowd. Born in poverty, raised by my mother's prayers, and married to a man this village now spits at. Murmurs rose, but she held firm. Yes, he hid who he was, not because he is a criminal, but because the world has a way of loving crowns and ignoring the head it rests on. She reached into her bag and pulled out the folder Chisholm had given her. These are the documents, founding papers, signatures, bank transfers, evidence. She handed them to Chief Ease, who squinted through his glasses, reading slowly. His face changed. The signatures match, he said, turning to the crowd, and the original business registration bears his name. Chisholm Nwoke. Gasps. Whispers. Eugene's smile vanished. Indali wasn't done. This man built something with his hands. He gave jobs, gave hope. He chose humility, not greed, and for that he was mocked. But let it be known today, my husband is not the liar. You are, Mr. Eugene. The square erupted. Eugene tried to protest, but his words tangled in his throat. Chief. Ezzy raised a hand. If what is here is true, then we have been fooled, not by Chisholm, but by the one who claimed what was never his. That afternoon a letter was written and stamped with the village council's seal. Eugene's ties to Zubatec Motors were suspended pending full investigation. And Chisholm. He was offered the community's support to reclaim his company, openly, proudly this time. That night in their little room, Chisholm knelt before Indali. Thank you, he whispered. She smiled through her tears, touching his face gently. "You gave me peace, Chisholm. Today, I gave it back to you." And they held each other, not like two people who had won a battle, but like two souls who had finally been seen. A month passed. The workshop where Chisholm once toiled in overalls now bore a new signboard. Zubatech Motors, founder Chisholm. Dwoke, the village, once quick to judge, now lined up with gifts and apologies. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, even the same elders who once turned their backs. But Chisholm hadn't changed. He still rose early, still rolled up his sleeves, still visited Ndali's Akara stand with a smile and a kiss on her forehead. Only now, his name carried weight. His footsteps echoed differently. At home, Ndali didn't ask for diamonds or mansions. Instead, she turned their small room into a sewing studio, thread, chalk, Ankara patterns on the wall. She began teaching other girls how to sew, telling them softly, "Your hands can build your future, just like his did." One afternoon, as she was measuring fabric for a local bride's dress, a familiar voice called from the door. "Ndali?" She turned. Myron stood there, heels too high for the red dust, phone in one hand, her painted lips curved in forced surprise. "Well, look at you. I heard your husband is now a CEO." Ndali wiped her hands on her wrapper. "He always was. Now the world just knows it." Myron walked inside without being invited. She looked around, her eyes catching the spools of thread, the scribbled sketches, the gowns in progress. "You could have been in the city by now, modeling, owning boutiques. Instead, you're teaching village girls how to sew?" Ndali looked at her and smiled. "Yes, because that's what queens do. We build palaces out of the mud." For the first time, Miran had no comeback. Outside, children ran past, laughing. The town had changed, but not as much as the people within it. Later that week, Chisholm stood before a small crowd at the grand relaunch of Zubatech's new village office. Beside him stood Ndali, in a gown she stitched herself, gold Ankara, that hugged her figure and flowed like royalty. When the press asked, "Sir, what kept you grounded when you were just the mechanic?" He turned, looked at her and said, "Her. The woman who saw my worth before the world did." The cameras flashed, but all Ndali saw was him, the man with grease-stained hands, the man who once bought her Akara every morning, the man who now stood beside her, not above, not ahead, but with her, together. 2 years later, Ibub was no longer just a dusty town on the map. The once-forgotten village had become a symbol of transformation. Zubatech Motors now operated a training center for local youth. Girls and boys once forced to travel to the city for work were now employed right at home, with dignity, with purpose, and at the center of it all, Ndali. The girl once mocked for marrying a grease boy now had a building named after her, the Ndali Center for Women's Craft and Enterprise. Inside, rows of young women bent over sewing machines. Some were stitching uniforms, others making beaded shoes and purses. On the wall hung a framed quote, "Power isn't in what you're given. It's what you create with your own 2 hands." That was Ndali's voice. Her story had traveled beyond Ibub. She was invited to radio shows, women's conferences, even featured in a national magazine. But she never left her compound, never swapped her wrapper for designer suits. "I belong here," she'd say, "where the dust still remembers my footsteps." At home, Chisholm would often come in quietly, watching her as she worked late into the night. She still sang softly while she stitched, just like she did when they first met under the mango tree. Their love had grown, weathered, rooted. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft orange, Chisholm sat beside her on their front step. Their fingers were intertwined, resting gently between them. "I still think about that day," he said. She smiled. "Which one?" "The day you chose me. Even when the world said I wasn't enough." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you chose me back, even when I had nothing but dust on my feet." A soft breeze blew. Children laughed somewhere far off. The stars slowly blinked awake, and in that moment, 2 people who were once invisible to the world, a poor girl and a struggling mechanic, had become something stronger than success. They had become each other's proof that love, truth, and humility can build legacies louder than gold.